Good afternoon. This is our panel after the break we just had after our wonderful keynote speaker, Suzette. I'm Kirsty McGregor. I'm an economic recovery and resilience consultant that's been working in the VI for about 4 years. So I want to have our panel each introduce themselves. We're going to be talking about resilience in the USVI, best practices, and some innovative projects that have taken place here. So Kyle, go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kyle Fleming. I'm the director of the Virgin Islands Energy Office, as well as the chairman of the Virgin Islands Water and Power Authority Governing Board.
Good afternoon. I'm Daryl Joshin, the director for the Virgin Islands Territorial Emergency Management Agency, responsible for islands of St. Croix, St. Thomas, St. John, and Water Island. The current population, we'll say about 87,000 individuals. For BITEMA today, we are responsible for the Hazard Mitigation Resiliency Plan. Very good, robust plan is now going to the final stage for that. And we'll talk some more about that, about where we are and how we got information from the University of Virgin Islands to make this a successful plan, as well as submitting it to FEMA.
Good afternoon. My name is Kirk Tuning. I'm a founder and partner in a company called Cane Bay Partners VI, Triple LP, located here in St. Croix. We've been operating here for 13 years, and we're in the fintech industry, providing scorecards and data analytics to banks and financial service providers.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about resilience, and I think the term resilience has only really caught on with the pandemic. And one of the things I've noticed is how the Virgin Islands, because of the situation of hurricanes and earthquakes, that you've been able to be and embrace resilience well in advanced years before. A lot of states are just trying to figure this out. So first we're going to talk about energy, and energy, of course, and utilities are some of the first things that site selectors look at for business attraction, and tech companies especially. So why don't you talk about what the territory has been doing with energy and being resilient in that space?
Perfect. Thank you. Yep. So the Virgin Islands has certainly been in a wide spectrum of transformation, especially since the 2017 storms. They gave us essentially a clean canvas to really rethink about our energy system and kind of the portrait of a utility of the future. As a result of that, and with the support of an extensive amount of federal resources, we've been able to rethink everything from transmission and distribution to generation, as well as even rethinking the energy model in terms of how we, as a utility and energy in the territory as a whole, provide reliable and affordable services to the customer. We know we have a really kind of tricky history as it pertains to kind of cost and reliability. And as a result, those have been some of the areas of focus that we've really tried to target by bringing in new generation, by hardening our transmission and distribution systems, and also taking into account, especially at the commercial level, the need to ensure that that resiliency from our economic drivers is available, because ultimately we won't really be able to see the economic growth of the territory if those primary drivers aren't supported.
And is that something in your role and well, the Water and Power Authority and Department of Energy, how they work with businesses and attracting businesses here? Like, is that something that you talk, because I'm assuming that's something high on their minds?
Yeah, it's been something I would say that the right amount of priority may not have been assigned in the past, but I think it's become even more critical now that we've seen the advancements in technology. Here in the territory, we've seen a number of commercial entities take on basically become their own power producers.
Right. That's it.
And we understand the resiliency needs that kind of drive that decision making. And the utility is looking at it not so much as a threat, but also trying to understand how we can participate in that model as well. I think one of the things we look at, the term microgrid pops up a lot.
Yes.
And it's something that we've been pursuing on St. John, on St. Croix, and I've also looked at projects in St. Thomas as well, and really looking at trying to get the energy generation closer to the demand. Right now we have 2 power plants at Richmond and Harley on St. Thomas and St. Croix, and we're transmitting across a really complex terrain, a really complex network, and ultimately to really harden that resilience, getting closer to the need is how we're trying to align our energies.
Well, and you brought up microgrids, so for those who aren't familiar with because the word is said a lot, especially with all this federal investment that you mentioned, there's millions, well, probably close to billions of dollars just for energy resilience and hardening that you mentioned. So why don't you explain exactly what a microgrid is, because I think it's on all 3 islands.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, so when we think of a microgrid, it's taking kind of a larger system of power plants and transmission and distribution and shrinking it down to the similar needs of generation, but closer to the source. So Microgrids can come in the form of solar and battery storage, which I think has become very popular. We've seen a lot of those systems at the residential and commercial level. But we also see microgrids that are, have traditional generator integration as well, or a combination of all three. So it's really looking at kind of diversity of on-site power resources is really what we look at like from a microgrid standpoint.
And I just think it's probably because we're islands here, but ahead of the game, everybody stateside is now looking at this, looking at microgrids, and you guys were 2 years ahead already looking at it. So I'm going to talk to Daryl because energy, of course, is directly related with what you do, emergency management, but in a lot of states, under emergency management is recovery and resilience. And when I first started working here, I thought that was incredible because resilience had not been embraced in what's called the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Plan. Mm-hmm. Here, it's a Hazard Mitigation Resilience Plan, and resilience is woven throughout the document that had been unprecedented at the time, and now everybody is following your lead, the Virgin Islands. And so I was wondering if you could talk about higher level planning and then how VITEMA looks at incorporating resilience into just everyday projects, communications, keeping people up to date.
Yes, higher level planning, we have a whole process we use, and it's based upon FEMA's best practices, if you will, called the MITEP. We look at risks in territory, and we specifically talk about the capabilities we have and the gaps that are in those risks. And that really drives a lot of the analysis that's done, and using the University of Virgin Islands and my Ms. Rivera from Hazard Mitigation really authors this to put together. There's a lot of science that goes into it also, but ultimately, what's the risk to the territory? And that risk drives the product, and resiliency really with FEMA has started this coming out. So we're one of the first ones that embraced resiliency, but realizing the history in the territory, you go back to 1989, Hurricane Hugo on St. Croix, 1995, Hurricane Marilyn and St. Thomas, you look at Irma Maria for all 4 islands, and then you even go back to 1867 with earthquakes and tsunamis. Mm-hmm. And today we still are in an earthquake tsunami zone. We have mitigation that's set up for that. We have 44 tsunami sirens that are being reestablished since Irma Maria to reestablish that resiliency. Also, you look at, not just natural conditions, but also man-made conditions. So we rebuilt this plan. We're also looking at international accreditation that requires us to look at both natural and man-made mitigation requirements and what those risks are. So we rebuilt the power grid 4 or 5 times. So I think now we're looking at building it better, smarter, so don't have to go back to that resiliency embrace. We've looked at building, the codes have changed. After Irma and Maria, we've designed the solar panels were coming out new. We looked at the analysis with FEMA and come up with better designs for solar panels. After in '89 with Hugo, a lot of our building codes were changed, and then now to protect those for current conditions. So a lot of it's come into that. University of Virgin Islands has really helped out the analysis for a lot of the flood zones. So that's one of the big concerns for us, and we want to mitigate those now, so in the future we're not spending more money and more risk, and of course saving lives is so important for us. So it's really that process that brings all the stakeholders into the territory, not just by VITEMA by themselves, but each agency to look at the critical infrastructure as a foundation, and that critical infrastructure then brings in the business and the continuity of government and really sustainability for the future.
Well, and you brought up a few good points too, looking at cross-sector, not just from an industry standpoint, but within the government, and you can't just look at isolated, education, you can't look separate from health, you can't look separate from the utilities. They all impact one another, and I think that is one thing that I learned from working here with resilience is embracing that cross-sector assessment, seeing how they all impact each other, but also prioritizing, because even though there's a lot of funding to support the territory right now, it's prioritizing what projects are going to have the highest and best use to harden. And are there any specific projects that you'd like to talk about?
Well, that's what the plan really helps justify, and that's what we present to FEMA, and the grant monies goes back to the due diligence we've done. Again, flood zone primarily is what you want to look at. If you have a housing community that's in the same area, we want to basically try to mitigate that, either get the houses, more robust or physically move them somewhere else so we won't have that issue. So a lot of it's around that, tying in the power grid aspect of that, working with the telecommunications sector, which is primarily private sector here, is very important. A lot of money is coming to the territory. So we build those next generations to make sure they are robust and they are able to embrace the resiliency that we have, not only as individuals, but also the environment here.
And I think any coastal state or territory has been having to deal with sea level rise. And the fact that your team was looking at this again a few years ago, and now with certain funding that's out there from the federal government, other states are now just starting to embrace us. So again, I think it's interesting how the Virgin Islands has been ahead of this and thinking proactively now for the past few years.
Yeah, I would say I would add that, even just looking at how we respond to a hurricane in the future is very important. I was with the Waste Management Authority, and they're the ones responsible for, with the Department of Public Works, to clear the roads in order to get the debris, but you have all this debris, and what do you do with this? We have to find locations that are environmentally safe and don't damage the environment to put that debris, whether it's green waste, where it's concrete, whether it's cars, whether it's appliances, and we have to manage that. Plus you have all the boats that may be, again, like Irma Maria,
Yep.
the Department of Planning and Resources has to take care of also. So all this now has to be thought ahead of time, so we know the next event comes, we are ready to go, and again, it's going to be approved from FEMA for reimbursement for the funds.
Sure. So we'll move on to Kirk here. He's the one private sector guy on the panel, so I think he'll bring a little different perspective. So first, I think for the audience, just how, when you came to the Virgin Islands and how it was different, what drove you to move your business here, and just a brief journey about how your business has expanded and really is a great case study.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'm thankful for these gentlemen providing the platform for us to do what we do. And I'm very thankful every day that someone's looking out for these things. Business is tough, just owning a business and starting a business, but it's very achievable here in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And I think that's one of the key messages that hopefully you take away from the summit, is that it's not only achievable, but you can excel. My partner and I moved down here 13 years ago and participated in one of the economic development programs. And it's been wonderful to partner not only with the government and see our business succeed, basically take some tax benefits and then reinvest in people and reinvest in infrastructure and frankly reinvest in the community, and really giving thought to maybe the things that our government can't necessarily do, some of the gaps in after-school education and some of the gaps in things that us as frankly community leaders need to be thinking about. It's really cool to see how both the government and the true public sector can come together with the private sector and do great things here. And I've seen it time and time again, whether it's with education, with energy. I never thought I'd have solar panels on my roof and drinking water out of a cistern, but it's doable and it's real. And here we're doing it, to your point, long before other people are doing it in the States. So, in some regards, you look at our community as sometimes behind in infrastructure and so forth, but a lot of times I really see us as ahead.
Yeah.
And I think if we keep pushing together, both privately and publicly, we could make it an even better place. And I would just say the shameless plug for any of the programs here is that they work, and you really can enhance your business, and more importantly, you can enhance the community that you live in. It's pretty awesome.
Well, and you do a lot of work in the community, and we talked about the size of your business. How many employees, internationally, but focused here in the territory?
Yeah, when we moved down here internationally, we had 150 employees worldwide. And this is our headquarters, and now we have 450 employees. And being able to take advantage of some of the tax benefits allowed us to make those investments in people, salaries, frankly, infrastructure, and so forth. It's exactly what it's supposed to be, and it works.
And finding that talent locally here, or even if there's people who relocate for talent, there's different programs, and even here at RT Park, that support bringing you the right talent that you need.
Yeah. We've partnered with several of the different programs, including the RT Park. Their incubator is in our building, actually. So we have seen where Vista's come, and really proud of the work that they've done there from a talent acquisition standpoint. But to answer the question more directly is, we look at it as threefold. First, try to find locals that could fit, a particular job opportunity, and then, and only then, look maybe off island. And what we try to do is find Virgin Islanders that are off island, and frankly, bring them back. I know we talked earlier in some of the sessions about the brain drain. Well, you got to think about it. You got to really think about how you focus that recruitment effort and bring people back here. And we've done that time and time again. We have, I don't know, probably 8 success stories like that alone, where we've brought back Virgin Islanders to work with us here locally at home, where frankly they really wanted to be. So.
Well, I think that's the other thing about economic development, which is my specialty, is it basically comes down to quality of life. Businesses, talent, they're going to go where people want to live, people want to work, and that quality of life, having sustainable, reliable energy, having these beautiful, beautiful environment. You can't have economic prosperity without working with your natural environment. I think sometimes people think that they're in conflict with one another, and they're certainly not. Something though, too, you are involved in the community and your family is here. You want to just briefly talk about how it's been having your family and your kids grow up here in the Virgin Islands.
Absolutely, my favorite thing to talk about. Now, I have a 5-year-old and 11-year-old little girl that mean everything to my wife and I, and we started our family here. You know, our children are born here, raised here, and frankly, they don't know anything different, but they love it here, and they want to be here, and our goal is to be here forever, frankly. And as a business owner or someone thinking of starting a business here in the territory, I'll just tell you, it's not only obtainable, but what you can do with it is far greater than I think you can do with businesses elsewhere. And I've started probably 42 different businesses, so I know this in different states and different environments and so forth. And you know, as an entrepreneur, I'd rather do it here all day long. I find ways to not travel to the States because I love being here so much with my team and my family.
Well, and this actually, with the driver who took me here, we were talking about him expanding his taxi business. And the thing is you can make so much of a mark here that it's a small population. You can make a really big impact as an entrepreneur and business owner here that you might not be able to in Philadelphia, New York, Boston. You actually can have access to leadership. Yeah. And I wondered if you could talk about that as a private sector person, being able to work with and to support it.
It's a great segue. The reality is there's a lot of people with a lot of great smarts and a lot of great resources here. I do some VC work myself and work with some of the RT Park companies as they start up and in certain roles. Sometimes it's advice, sometimes it's reviewing a financial model, sometimes it's investing in them alongside them. And as a private company that can be close to the government and work closely with the sector, it's pretty exciting to see the opportunities. As an investor, see the opportunities that are here. And some of the business that's going on here really, can leverage that extra help. And if you're there with your eyes wide open, it's pretty awesome, frankly.
Well, and this is the final point that I should have brought up earlier. Economic resilience, the key way to approach that is having industry diversification. And this is not limited to the island of, for tourism or the refinery. Everyone's starting to pick up on this because of the pandemic, right? And I think with your financial services that we need to start looking, and the Virgin Islands is promoting other industries, also the health of their tourism and hospitality, which they do great, but in building them up, but also trying to diversify with other industries. So have you seen anything, sectors there?
I'm glad you brought that up. I think the EDA did a great job with their Vision 2040 plan, and they outlined a lot of the things that we really need to execute on as a community in the different verticals. I think they did a lot of studying some of these verticals that are possible. I know I've talked to the leadership of the RT Park about workforce development and how it all comes together, i.e. what's attainable, what really we can do with the people that we have and the resources that we have. And I think there's been a lot of good thought in that process over the last 3 years. So again, as a business owner looking to come down and join us in the USVI, I think it's a great time to do it. And I think the infrastructure is there. I think the thought pattern is there. And I think the partnership, both privately and publicly, is ripe to be able to do great things.
Yeah, we call that from another small state that I'm located in, a state of neighbors, and you're always running into people, and it's a great way, though, to get work done, and it's really working truly as a community. So I think what we can do is look at some higher level questions. Since 2017, you brought up, Daryl, the Irma Maria. For a lot of people who don't know that date, 2017, it's in my mind all the time. I think we'll start here with Kyle. Is there any program or initiative or that since the hurricanes that just has blown you away that has made a difference and doesn't have to be related to energy, but in general?
Yeah, I will stick with energy because a lot has happened in that space. Obviously, it's the area in which I work very closly. And I think, I talked a little bit about the microgrids earlier, but one of the pieces that we also want to highlight is the hardening aspects. So, if you drive around the Virgin Islands right now from St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix, you'll notice that our power lines here look a little bit different than traditionally what you would see elsewhere, in the region and even sometimes stateside. Whereas wood poles were our kind of standard and norm, we've made a pretty aggressive and holistic shift to composite poles.
Yep.
That are rated for much higher wind resistance. To Daryl's point earlier, he talked about building back better. Yes, we could have replaced, and there was some immediate response to put back some of the original infrastructure, but that was quickly followed by an enhancement in the infrastructure that's there. We understand the environment we're in. 2 storms 2 weeks apart. That gets you thinking not about the 10 years from now, but it gets you thinking every year what could be the case. And so seeing a project like that, especially how quickly and how far we've been able to expand those installations of composite poles, is great. I think it also shows the Virgin Islands, and I think the Kirk points, where we're actually a little bit more advanced. I've traveled quite a bit. I haven't seen that level of composite pole infrastructure deployment anywhere else.
I haven't either.
Yeah.
But to your point, though, of the response phase you brought up, and I'm going to have Daryl just touch on this a little bit before I have you answer. But one of the things where I've been trained with FEMA is the response phase, the recovery phase, the resilience, how that's ongoing, and mitigation is ongoing, and preparedness. But you were able to embrace that like emergency room, those few weeks or months that follow the storm, to just bring you to those life-saving efforts. And then that long term is when you start doing the projects like that. So you do need to make sure that things go back to a point where you're sustained, but you do have those bigger projects that can take place next. But to Fatima's point, really understanding those different phases, the ongoing ones, you were promoting preparedness the other day, how they all are interrelated, but they are a little different.
Yes, and Governor Bryan taking a road, what they did 3.5 years ago, they also developed a Office of Disaster Recovery. And we're tracking over 1,500 projects, of which we have 300 of those in the top 300 for the governor. And they all go back to the 2040 vision, they go back to the STEM, they go back to what do we need to build for the future. We know schools, we know hospitals are critical for us, we know roads, we know the sewer, we know the water, power. That's all critical infrastructure we have to do. And if we get that done, and it won't happen tomorrow, but there's a deliberate process we go through, and then we're not just building it back to how it used to be. We worked with FEMA to develop it to today's standards, today's technology, and it's not done how it's built back in the States, it's how it's done here in the territory, so we can have better understanding of the cost for building the structures, the concrete, the infrastructure we have to put in place. The cisterns are so much more expensive here to do than back in the States. So that's been put in place. And if we do that now in the future, then we don't have to do as much of the preparedness and response, and that goes on as much as we did, and the gap between those becomes less and less. For example, we've talked about safe rooms, which is a term that FEMA uses that really talk about shelters, if you will, where you're going to go. So a lot of the structures we're building in the future today, they're going to be nice places to go if you have to shelter from the storm or after the storm to stay for a longer term until your house is restored or business comes back to be. And that's so important that FEMA understands that, and we embrace that. So a lot of the schools are being built today. We're still so fragile that part of my preparedness response is working with the Department of Human Services, identify shelters on our 4 islands. And it's difficult to find ones that the Red Cross can come into and say, we can manage these, but we know each year it's going to get better and better. Kyle and I have worked on, one of our sites called Complex. The microgrid is going to help provide that continued power, because once the power goes out, I have to have the backup generator in place ready to go. And some of these are not small, they're large, and they're very expensive. So what we're doing today makes it so much better. And it's that cycle, so we do get the stakeholders back together again. We look at the risk and how we mitigate that risk at top priority. If you go back again to the governor, go back to the infrastructure that has to be built in order to improve the housing, the schools, to then bring businesses into the territory that can come and say, we are ready for you to build and build better.
Yeah.
I've got one just quick follow-up, and thank you for bringing up the microgrid at Complex, which is actually across the street from where we are now. But I wanted to kind of highlight that as a lot of things we're taking is the lessons learned from the 2017 storms. And I think that's one of the things I really like to impress upon people, especially as they're considering the Virgin Islands. While we have had some historical challenges, we want to certainly emphasize our ability to learn from those mistakes or even just like oversights in the past and the corrective actions that are being taken. For example, at the shelter, the microgrid there, we saw the challenges of relying fully on generators at our critical infrastructure sites, and there's a number of challenges we saw there between maintenance challenges, even fuel delivery challenges, and those supporting logistics. And we realized, okay, being fully reliant on these type of emergency power solutions, we have to also diversify the energy mix that's there. So not just looking to be solely reliant on thermal generation or standard generators, diesel or propane, looking at solar and storage and adding additional energy resources at those critical infrastructure sites, so we don't only have one source of resilience, we have multiple layers of resilience at those critical infrastructure points.
No, that's a great point. Kirk, do you want to bring up an example over the past few years that has blown you away since living here?
Several examples. From an infrastructure standpoint, I think Kyle talks about power, and as a real just resident of the island, we have seen major transformation go on. Major transformation in the use of solar just as individuals. So it's very realistic as a business person to say, I want to make an investment in solar. Most states, if you make that investment, the return is maybe 10 to 20 years. You can make, because the cost of power is higher here, I think we all know that. But those investments feel a lot better when it's, for me, I think it was a 2.3 month reinvestment or payback on my investment. And so it's pretty phenomenal, and I've seen a lot of the general population, make that investment, save and make that investment because it's important. So from a transformation standpoint, that's one area. There's a lot of other things in education that I think have transpired overall, which are good, with a lot of different people partnering with the Department of Education, public sector and private sector, and saying, hey, here's some gaps, and how do we come together, both publicly and private? I think we've done that. We created an after-school program called Operation Inspire with our Cane Bay Cares initiative, and that's just one example of, frankly, thousands here where the private sector has worked with the public sector, saw the gaps, and said, hey, how can we fill these gaps in? And working with people like Peter Chapman at the RT Park and say, hey, we have a business coming down, here's what their needs are. Can you give them some feedback on what's good, what's bad, what works, what doesn't work, and so forth? I think what you'll find is most Virgin Islanders are very open to helping. We're constantly ambassadors for our territory, frankly, because we love it.
Yep. Daryl, I don't think I gave you a chance because we started talking about preparedness, but to talk about a major program that you would...
Well, I think we built it and we had to use it. This goes back to the VINGN and building up the fiber optics into the territory. And then we were forced during COVID to use it for education. Mm-hmm. And Commissioner Barry Benjamin, her staff did a fantastic job getting the hardware out, getting the software out, getting the students to get online. We had a couple bumps, but fantastic. Today, we can go in and out of that capability to learn at home and work in school. It's almost seamless, but I know it's not seamless. Yep. But we did stand up, the capabilities to have that high-speed fiber optic and then still benefit from that. I know the current Governor Bryan says he wants hotspots through a BING at all of our, commercial areas that may be like businesses for airports, seaports, where we gather together because we had a tremendous challenge after Irma Maria, just getting on the net, getting to pay your bills, getting to communicate with loved ones. So we know that's going to happen again. So developing that initiative through VINGN to get that and through other local providers to get those hotspots up, and again, no cost to the public to go on that. That's innovative thinking, but I think the education is the biggest thing I've seen, and it's getting better and better.
Well, and one thing across that has come up a little bit with each of you, and of course it is germane to today, working with the private sector, working with businesses. And I'm going to say this having worked all over the country, that one of the biggest challenges pre-pandemic was having the private sector be involved, small businesses be involved, because they don't have time to be at everything, right? Mm-hmm. But of course now they see the impact that they need to be involved. I think it was a little different here in the Virgin Islands just based on what we're talking about. People want to be involved and be a part of things. So I was wondering if each of you could kind of touch on in your space working with businesses and some of the startups that we've been talking about here. So if someone does come and want to start a business here, how does your sector engage?
Yeah.
Probably different each.
Yeah, I think the energy space is certainly, I mean, it's a critical one, right? As I'm sure every topic we talk about will be. But, you know, the world's relationship with energy is only growing. We're seeing electrification happen in every sector, from standard appliances to transportation. And we realize that companies that would be coming here are going to be aligned in that same trajectory as well. So, you know, the way I look at it, especially from the utility standpoint, you know, that growth in appetite for various energy needs, and looking at how the utility can diversify our way of providing those services. So we're looking at everything from building out a very complex and comprehensive electric vehicle charging station network in the Virgin Islands. Okay. We see the transportation shift coming here, or it's on a global scale already, and the Virgin Islands offers one competitive advantage that isn't necessarily available in the continental U.S., which is a small footprint, which means less range anxiety. Right. So we see the challenge of this transition on the mainland, and that's actually something that, you know, it's one of the few areas that it's not a challenge for us. So we see a way of being able to quickly grow and develop infrastructure to support that. And since we know that there's an appetite for that, especially in the technology space, you know, we know people are, those sectors tend to be the ones that are electrifying their fleet. So we want to make sure that as they're making those decisions, we here in the territory, from a utility standpoint, are providing the energy service needs to fulfill that appetite.
No, that's great. And Daryl?
I would say, you know, supply chain management is one of the key things. You know, we live on an island, probably 97% of what we get comes outside the territory. And VITEMA works with the maritime side, work with the major shippers to watch what happens. Of course, Mother Nature, I always says, always has a vote. So usually in the month of September, nothing will come out of Miami down here because of the storms. I understand that. But I think, you know, working together to develop that ability to visually see in multiple supply chains and help them develop that is so important, because you have to have primary, secondary, tertiary. You talk about the Jones Act.
Yeah.
That's something that's big for us. You know, we don't have a Jones Act requirement for here. So the flagships that come in don't have to be U.S. flag, but Puerto Rico.
Yeah, explain that. Yeah.
Puerto Rico, however, has to have that, and of course a lot of the supplies come from Puerto Rico, so it has to be a U.S. flagship to bring that product in, but coming to us, you don't have to have that. So then the president can make those changes on the emergency, but that's one of the big benefits to us in the territory.
Well, and that was recent news, too. The governor working with the maritime.
Yes,
right?
developing the future for us,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah,
that could be a pretty big deal for
Yeah,
the blue economy.
It is. Again, forward thinking, what's available
Yes.
for us for the future, always looking at trying to bring new technology, new business here, and the ability to sustain it is so critical.
Yeah, I'll take it more from a personal standpoint than a kind of a government perspective, is what we've done to diversify basically into other verticals and understanding that. Obviously, we had a large oil refinery here for a long period of time that provided a lot of income, a lot of jobs, obviously a great deal of the economy. And we've been able to kind of shift really from that, where we're seeing new businesses come down now, seeing new businesses invest heavily in our different islands. It's amazing the private investment that's going on right now. But I'll take a step back and say, after the hurricane, it was even more amazing to see the community come together and help each other. And I think you have that more here in the USVI than I've seen it in other communities. Obviously, just after a storm, the amazing things that the people of the VI did to help each other out. And the diversity of our communities is pretty vast, and everyone coming together for one common good. I see that a lot more here. I see that diversity, but that ability to work as one team and understand what we all want for success for the Virgin Islands. So that's more of a personal approach of what I've seen, and I think it's been improving drastically over the last 3-4 years in how we're looking at this wider. And these guys talked about the infrastructure, the blue economy, and some of the other verticals. It's real, and there's great opportunities right now. I even look at it from an investment standpoint as some great opportunities here. So I encourage you to consider that.
You spoke the other day, Kirk, on the phone with me about ag too, agriculture, and some of 2% of the food is from here, right? So it's all 98% is from offline. So there's been some pretty innovative tech companies here working in that space, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I know on an earlier session we had one of the founders of Farm Shelf,
Yep.
and obviously an ag company, an ag tech company. There's several of them in the RT program, and I think within the EDC and the EDA. And there's a lot of opportunity there. If you think about our produce, you know, a great deal of it comes from California. It's 4,000 miles away. You know, you talk about supply chain, that's a 2-week process to potentially get here. So as we think about that, you know, it drives the demand quicker here. And it's, again, the theme of what we're talking about is, in some ways we're behind, and in other ways we're actually becoming more advanced by solving the problem sooner than other people are in other communities. And I see that happening here a great deal in not only ag, but in other verticals.
It's just a great example about how you're becoming more sustainable too, while promoting innovation and technology and sustainability. I'm going to have this one last question. I think that if there were audience questions, but we've all touched on this, and it's not unique to the Virgin Islands, but I think it was here before stateside. Other states are just becoming used to ARPA money and all these different supplemental funding. And I think the difference with people in the Virgin Islands is you've now become accustomed to the challenges and opportunities that go with that federal funding. So I wondered, in each of your spaces, and I know it might be a little different from private, but just what maybe observations, working with the federal funds to support the long-term recovery, not just with the Irma Maria, but also ARPA, CARES Act, all the pandemic. I mean, hit you guys too. So.
Yeah, I can say from the energy space, it's definitely been an exercise in learning the importance of critical project management. I think it's provided a lot of exposure from the community level. I can think of a number of the projects that we have in the energy space that are heavily reliant on these federal resources, and managing the administration of those resources, managing the projects associated with those resources. It's been a massive undertaking for us, but we've been able to learn a lot throughout that process, and it's a continual learning process as well. But I think it certainly situates us well in the future as we continue to take on more innovative and progressive projects as well. Being able to leverage these federal funds to set that foundation of learning, because keeping these critical timelines and ensuring that the results and impacts are realized, that's really important. And so having those resources as a test bed and a learning opportunity has been great.
And Daryl, I mean, that's what you guys are working on all the time, right?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing is a hazard mitigation resiliency plan is the foundation by which, we are able to justify to FEMA what our future can be, and that's what the grants are based upon. That we can't show the droughts, we can't show the flood zones, we really can't justify going forward. CARES Act, tremendous asset down here. Governor Bryan allowed me to purchase 10 generators, again, for the next hurricane, if you will, for our shelters. The National Guard, like all other states, we have a national state of emergency still going on. So we've been able to, for 2 years now, place National Guard soldiers at airports, seaports, support our Department of Health in everything we can do. We have a small footprint, about 200 soldiers, but they've been great to work with, and having those funds have really helped us keep the pandemic to a very small impact down here to the territory. So 3 things I think are very critical for us.
Yeah, these guys, again, are hardening the grid and the backbone of what it is. And I'll just tell you from a general public is we see airports being worked on, we see ports being worked on, we see our streets being paved. We see good things happening. Is it ever happening fast enough? No, I think we always want it to happen faster, better, and stronger, but we're really seeing these things happen, which is pretty exciting.
Well, we've got several questions from the audience. But I think this is good for Daryl. What redundancy systems, actually with Energy 2, have been put in place since 2017 that maybe we didn't already touch on?
Well, communications is number one thing I look for redundancy. So I mentioned that fiber optic is in here very much. You have multiple paths by which you get communications out. Satellite communications is here. If you want to talk what happened the last couple of weeks, we have Starlink now in the territory. So those individuals that are interested in getting satellite communications, very positive right now. So that's a lot of that has come through. It's still a lot of private sector, if you will, but you have VI and GN and having that ability to go forward. I think that's the biggest thing I've seen on redundancy that's been put in place. I'll leave it at that for right now.
Yeah, and I guess I'll touch on specifically one of the projects in St. John. So St. John is a separate island from St. Thomas, but it's connected to the grid via submersible cable. One of the kind of mitigation projects that were identified was, having it be fully reliant on this submersible cable wasn't the best configuration for them. So one of the projects we have is the St. John microgrid, where we'll be putting about 8 megawatts of generation on St. John. St. John hasn't had its own dedicated generation historically from the utility standpoint. And this is going to allow for them to still operate and utilize the submersible cable that connects it to St. Thomas, but also allow it to operate independently in the event that there is a major outage on St. Thomas or another disaster, kind of separating and creating some energy independence between the islands. It was one of the major projects that we have on the way there.
And this may be across the board. One question, are there training programs with the agencies and companies for professionals in resiliency, and what skills that are needed for rebuilding in the Virgin Islands? And I think that also goes back to trades and skills just for the actual, all this construction that's going and is happening, and that's what I'm getting from this, but whoever wants to.
I know there are a couple of things that are coming out. I know there's apprentice programs that we've begun. Governor Bryan's also set up now through the Department of Labor some project management skill courses like you're talking about. We're going to have a surge of project management, construction management. We're starting that foundation right now. The apprenticeship programs are so critical for us. I know there's also a workforce summit that we're going to put on this year. I know we're trying to hire Commissioner Gary Malloy from Labor, 1,000 individuals to support us in the territory, at the government to help us. So that's great for us to build that foundation, that interest in your next job, your next career.
And I can speak to, I mentioned earlier the composite pole project that we have in the territory. While we ended up outsourcing the actual install of that project, so we do have a third-party vendor that's doing the actual pole integration, we've made sure that our linemen are also being exposed to that training and learning how to integrate and work on this new technology from a transmission and distribution sector. So as we're seeing these projects, especially these high level of innovation projects come into play, ensuring that we're coupling training and equipping our local teams to be prepared to continue to support that infrastructure going forward, definitely a consistent theme.
This question piggybacks on that too. Electric cars, electric vehicles, that's the trend across the country now too, with the Infrastructure and Jobs Act funding, I think is driving some of that as well. But what is the expense there, the ROI, I guess is what they're asking, as opposed to gas? And we know that I saw gas was $4.99 a gallon on the islands.
Yeah, so we've actually, so this is from the Energy Office standpoint, we've actually partnered with a consultancy firm called the Electrification Coalition. And they've been working very closely with us on analyzing our fleets here in the Virgin Islands and comparing, even at our cost of electricity and the cost of fuel, what the total cost of ownership and cost per mile is for an EV alternative compared to internal combustion. In some places in the States where electricity is incredibly cheap, it's a no-brainer from an economic standpoint. Here, despite some of the relatively high cost of electricity, we were still able to demonstrate saving potential with the transition to electric vehicles, which is another confirming point of why this transition works well for us here in the territory. I think if anything, the recent surges in gas prices and the volatility in the fossil fuel market also highlights the necessity to diversify and also being able to rely on energy resources that we could provide locally for transportation, as opposed to being kind of in that vulnerable space where we're never really going to have much control over that market. Distancing ourselves from that vulnerability is very important.
Kirk, how does that relate to having a business here?
Yeah.
I just wanted your take.
Well, I'll do the personal side of it again, too, is our longest island is 28 miles, okay? So, I average about 6,000 miles on my car every year, whereas, in the United States, the average commute is far greater. So from an energy usage, just from that standpoint alone, as a consumer living here and having a business here, you might not have the same expense. Now, how I look at solar and those investments I already shared with you, the return on investment is easy. It's a no-brainer to be able to do that. From a car standpoint, it's probably a harder math equation to do, but I think we're getting there, as Kyle said, yeah.
Yep. So here's a great question here. Will the USVI power grid be 100% renewable and independent in the future?
Yeah, and so I think that there's always the the easy response to that, and the goal is always yes, right? Our goal is always to limit our reliance on any type of outside resource because ultimately the resource we have control over can be more reliably delivered and support our needs. We're working very aggressively to shift our 100% fossil fuel generation to as much renewables as possible. And we realize that that balance and that transition is going to take some time, but we've got some very aggressive initiatives for St. Croix in particular because we have a very favorable terrain here for solar development. And so we're really chipping away at this kind of incumbent fossil fuel base to move it towards as much renewables as we can integrate in the grid in the near term.
Well, I want to thank all three of you, experts in each of your fields, but also collaboratively. This made for a great discussion, I think, for our audience as well. Thank you to our audience for staying with us. It's been a pleasure for me, and I know you guys are all busy right now too, so really thank you for taking the time out on a Friday afternoon. The next panel will have a break first, and then the final panel will be Peter Chapman speaking with Siobhan on the RT Park. So thank you again. There's a short break, and that's it. Thank you so much.